Ms. Olson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise as a woman who did read the bill and urge a no vote on AB 775. As one of the authors of this legislation stated, we should trust women to make their own choices. And this bill actually prevents that because women choose to seek assistance from these pregnancy centers. Nobody forces them to go. Nobody forces them to stay. They choose to go, and they have the option to leave at any time. AB 775 sets a bad precedent by allowing the state, a government entity, to dictate what information a nonprofit organization, a nonprofit that receives not a dime of state or government funding, has to provide to its clients. Members, to penalize private groups for their views and values is wrong. It's un-American. It's a violation of the First Amendment that grants each and every one of us the freedom of speech. And I will defend that right for any nonprofit group, whether I agree with their views or disagree with their views. They have the right to say it or to not say it. We each have the freedom to support or not support any of the thousands of nonprofits in our state that represent a wide diversity of causes. If we don't agree with the group's beliefs, we have the choice to not volunteer with that group, to not donate to that group. In fact, we not only have that choice, but we have the right to speak in fervor, with fervor, against that group's beliefs. But we should not allow government to dictate to that private nonprofit group what they have to say or not say. The freedom to have differing beliefs and values is one of our country's great strengths. This bill would weaken those fundamental rights that all of us serve here in this body to protect. So I urge all of us to reconsider AB 775. It speaks directly to our fundamental rights as Americans in the freedom of speech. Please vote no on AB 775. I urge you to make sure that these are decisions that remain between women and their health care providers. We should not be compelling the speech of health care providers. Similar laws in other states, most recently New York, have been struck down in court based on First Amendment grounds. This bill can meet the same fate. So let's not even go that route. Let's make sure we're respecting the rights of women to make decisions with their health care providers and keep government out of that subject matter. Urge a no vote.
Thank you, Ms. Olson. Ms. Gonzalez, you are recognized.
As quite possibly the only person in this chamber who actually walked into a clinic, young, unmarried, a student, and pregnant, I don't understand why we're so afraid of allowing women a complete access to information. I actually really like the pregnancy centers in my district. And I'm going to be very honest about that. At first, when the proponents of this bill came to my office to try to, I guess, badmouth them, I had to tell them in my community there are many young women like me who have a range of options and understand that and still choose to have a baby. And that's a beautiful, unplanned but not unwanted scenario. And those pregnancy centers offer some things that nobody else does. Free diapers, help, support. But this isn't about whether they're good or bad. It's about girls and young women understanding they have a litany of options. Because then when an unplanned pregnancy becomes a child, it's not an unwanted child. It is very much a decision. And so the only problems, if there are any with this bill, is I would hope that we put the same requirements on providers of abortion that we do on the medical centers, and I hope that's something we can look at. But choice is a beautiful thing and results in a lot of wanted babies. And so I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Madam Speaker, Mr. Gallagher, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker, members, I think this is a very important bill for us to consider today. And, as my colleague from San Diego pointed out, this doesn't work both ways. It's only required for 4% of the clinics in this state that they provide this notice. It does not apply to the public clinics that receive public funding and money, it doesn't apply to them to provide this notice about the crisis pregnancy resource centers in their neighborhoods. So this bill doesn't work both ways. It targets one section of the clinics that provide help to women in need in our communities. And we just prayed, as we started off this session, that we wouldn't malign religious beliefs. And last week many of us attended a prayer breakfast where Francis Chan spoke. And I think what we learned there is that, faith causes people to do some really incredible things. It caused Francis Chan to go into the Tenderloin and to help support the homeless population in San Francisco. I would argue that faith has inspired many of these women to volunteer and be a part of these crisis pregnancy resource centers. And not just because of their feelings or their beliefs about abortion, but because their faith teaches them that to whom much has been forgiven, much grace is expected. And so that's why these women go in day out. I've met them so many times over my time in politics. And I hear their stories of many of them having been in crisis pregnancies themselves. And that's why they have a heart for this, and they volunteer, and they don't give women misinformation. And I'm sorry, but if we're going to pass legislation based on a report that has absolutely zero source documentation, we have a real problem here. On a report that would not hold up in a court of law, there's no videotapes, there's no recording, there's hearsay. We have pure hearsay as to what was said in those clinics. We should not allow ourselves to pass legislation based on a faulty report. We need objective information that would hold up in a court of law when we make these decisions. But as I said, these women are inspired to help other women because they've been through the same thing themselves. That's what their faith teaches them, and we are targeting people because of their beliefs. And we're going to target that 4% of clinics. Members, let's not do this. That's not what we were put here to do. We were put here to protect all beliefs. We were put here to protect all people. And especially when we're talking about a group of people and organizations who are helping women in crisis in our communities. Let's not target these people who are giving their volunteer time and their private money, by the way. So you're asking them to use their private money to support your speech, what government has mandated that they should say. Instead of government using its own money to do so, we're going to force these private clinics to do it themselves, to use the precious resources that they have to help women in their communities. This is a bad bill, and I just ask you to search your heart on this one and vote right and vote no on AB 775. Thank you, members.
Madam Speaker, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clearly, there's always going to be a lot of conversation when you deal with an issue like this, but let me just say, as a person who ran 3 clinics that provided services to women, this is about protecting the health and safety of women. It's not about trampling on religious beliefs. Every entity needs to be held accountable to support the client that comes through their door. You use phrases like government message, ride roughshod over the Constitution. What about riding roughshod over the health options of women? Licensed clinics are required by the state of California to provide every option. There are regular licensed visits, I've been through many, where charts are pulled and client education is reviewed to see what did you provide the client that came into the clinic. So, to say that it is not balanced, that the clinics that receive government funding are not required to uphold certain standards is just not true. They're required. And so the pregnancy centers who provide great support to some women who seek them out need to be able to not misinform, which does happen, and that's a problem. That is those individuals that go into that center seeking because they have a brochure or a billboard or an ad in the yellow pages, if you still use those, when you see those ads and it says, we are going to be able to give you information about all of these things, you're going to look at your resources and you're going to go to any number of those places to get the information you need. I have talked to hundreds and hundreds of women and directed them where they need to go based on what they need. Prenatal care, support services around prenatal care, adoption. Yes, people still choose adoption. As my colleague from Fresno said, they still want to have that option, and you need to help them have the resources to go where they need to go. And you're required to have those options. If you get government funding, you're to provide all of that, in addition to the ability to have an abortion if that is what you want to do. And you know what? There's health care that goes along with that. There's misinformation all over the place, not from one side or another, but out in the world, just in talking with conversation and girlfriends. You hear misinformation about sexually transmitted diseases, about any number of things that need to be corrected by healthcare providers who know how to inform people. I met a woman who thought she could not have a pregnancy go to term because she had herpes. And she was told by someone, I know, I'm just going to tell you, this is what happens. She thought that if she gave birth at a time that she had an outbreak, her baby would be affected, and she couldn't do that. She was ready to have an abortion, and the doctor with her said, that is not true. We can help you take your pregnancy to term and deal with it at that time. So this is about protecting the health of women and giving them all options. And I think my colleague from Santa Clara dealt with the legal issues and the constitutional issues. And to talk about, riding roughshod over the Constitution, what about what we owe our citizens in terms of health and public safety? So I think when you equalize the playing field and you tell anyone, if you are going to go as far as to do something that could hurt someone's health, if a woman really does want to choose abortion and she's delayed 3 weeks, that can make the difference between a 1-day, a 2-day, or a hospital stay. That can make the difference between her ability to actually carry out her wish with her family, her spiritual guiders, and her minister, if that be the case. So I think, we get a little off base on either sides here. As someone who worked on this, our goal was to make sure that anyone who came through those doors got exactly what they needed. And we had referrals for everything. It was required by the state, but it was also what we felt like we needed to do. And so, I think providing information we should never be afraid of. Providing information is something we should all strive to do for our constituents, because it is about respecting our spiritual beliefs, our religious beliefs, respecting our Constitution, but it is also about protection and safety for the women and their families who need these services. This is a good bill. Please support this bill.
All debate having ceased, Mr. Chu, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues. First of all, I want to thank both the supporters and the opponents of this bill for your thoughtful debate. And let me say that I very much respect that we may not all agree on the constitutional right to choose. I think we can agree to disagree, but at the end of the day, that's not the issue. This is a bill that ensures that women can make informed decisions about their reproductive choices with scientifically accurate and timely information. This is a bill also about a very simple and short notice. Again, for unlicensed facilities, all the notice needs to say is really one line. The facility is unlicensed. There are no licensed medical providers on staff. For licensed facilities, just a handful of lines. It's a simple notice that says that free or low-cost public programs are available for comprehensive family planning services, prenatal care, and abortion services. We've had a bit of a conversation about clinics and centers that both sides of the aisle, we can agree, are doing a lot of good work. And again, this bill does not provide any preference of one kind of clinic over another. It doesn't prevent any center from providing any current ongoing services. Now, our colleague from Nicholas referred to so-called hearsay. And let me just mention the report that we're talking about. There was an investigation of hundreds of clinics, and it was found that over 90% of so-called crisis pregnancy centers had provided false information about the link between abortion and negative health consequences. For example, the following is what was included in a brochure that was handed out at a crisis pregnancy center. Mr. Speaker, permission to read?
Without objection.
So in this brochure, it states that possible long-term complications of abortions include guilt and personality disturbances for future desired pregnancies, miscarriages, premature delivery, and breast cancer. And specifically with regard to breast cancer, it states that an abortion in the early months of pregnancy predisposes a woman to getting breast cancer. Let me also respond to the contention that we're only talking about some of these clinics. Hundreds of our clinics are required under federal law to provide full information about the full spectrum of options, not just abortion services, but prenatal care. And as our colleague, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, stated, we drafted this very much anticipating constitutional challenges, very much taking into account the constitutional issues, and ensuring that we're protecting both the constitutional right to choose as well as the First Amendment. Colleagues, I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. With that, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 46, noes 25. Measure passes. File items 18 through 21 pass and retain. Moving to file item number 22, that's AB 56. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 56 by Assemblymember Quirk and others, enacted relating to unmanned aircraft systems.
Mr. Quirk, you may open.
Thank you, Speaker and members. Unmanned aircraft, also known as drones, can serve many societal benefits, including search and rescue, assessing hostage situation, addressing bomb threats, and detecting forest fires. Despite the possible benefits, there's potential for misuse without clearly established policies that protect privacy rights. While the Federal Aviation Administration is in the process of developing guidelines for the integration of drones into our airspace, California has no law or regulation governing the use of drones. AB 56 will regulate the use of unmanned aircraft systems by law enforcement and public agencies, as well as the dissemination and use of any images, data, and footage obtained by those systems. AB 56 seeks to strike a balance between the need to protect privacy and allow law enforcement to use new technology to save lives, fight crime, while also creating more transparency and accountability. Members, I respectfully ask for your aye vote to this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Quirk. Ms. Grove, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, too, rise in support of this bill, and I appreciate my colleagues' balance in utilizing new technology along with the concerns that the public may have. You know, in my district, they produce the Monarch, which is a drone manufacturing facility, and they've been able to assist agricultural in the drought use to fly over the crops and to see where places are wet or more dry and where water needs to evenly flow. They've also been able to use chips in large inventory structures to where they can identify where pieces of equipment are, which saves time for some companies to be able to utilize this. They've utilized them in search and rescue issues. They've utilized them to map out canyons and give us an actual virtual of canyons that have never been able to be explored before in the high desert area. So this is a very good bill and a very good balance, and I thank the author for bringing it forward.
Thank you, Ms. Grove. Mr. Cooper, you are recognized.
Yes, I want to thank my colleague for bringing this forward. It's a good bill, but I do have some issues with some of the points on it, and one being obtaining prior approval from legislative bodies. So if you're a sheriff, you're a constitutional officer. So now you must go before your board of supervisors, who are 5 members, not involved in law enforcement, to get permission. Another issue for my colleagues from Southern California, when you leave cities and counties for different jurisdictions, you must notify them ahead of time if it's not exigent circumstances. Well, quite frequently, we're following folks that are involved in human trafficking, drug dealing, and gang activity with that. So if you're down in Southern California, you go from one jurisdiction to another, it's not possible. We do a lot of surveillance under things that are not under exigent circumstances. So that's one of my concerns with that. And also, a lot of, for surveillance, a lot of things are in the public purview. It's not in somebody's backyard or hidden. So in the public right-of-way, we take photographs all the time of people's houses, fences, and a lot of things that right now, the way the law reads, we're able to. So I think it's open to interpretation whether that will be acceptable by a drone or not. So I think it's a good piece of legislation. It just needs some fine-tuning with that. And really the big part is the constitutional officers must mandate that or approve it. That's the big problem.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Seeing no further discussion or debate, Mr. Quirk, you may close.
Yes. The main objection here raised by the member from around Sacramento. I'll remember your town sometime soon. Anyway, the main concern was approval by the Board of Supervisors when a sheriff wants to bring this forward. I think this is an important aspect of the bill. We think it is very important that people know that these are out here and what it is they're doing. As far as investigations and going into other jurisdictions, we will definitely work on that. Certainly, we will make sure that if you have a warrant for an investigation, you can go into other jurisdictions, whether they've given permission or not. What we didn't want is to have some sort of general surveillance of other jurisdictions by a jurisdiction that has a drone, unless that other jurisdiction gives permission. On the other hand, if they have a warrant, they should be able to go into any jurisdiction. We will make sure that that happens. But again, I think the main thing here is that the public needs to know, and that a good way to do this is to have the Board of Supervisors have a hearing. My own belief is that every Board of Supervisors will look at this and decide on its own merits. There are so many good merits to this, I doubt that there will be any jurisdictions that do not go forward with some use of drones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quirk. With that, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tie the vote. Ayes 57, noes 10. Measure passes. File item 23 passed and retained. Moving to file item 24. That's AB 1017. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1017 by Assemblymember Campos and others, an act relating to employers.
Ms. Campos, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I present to you AB 1017, a bill that would work towards ensuring pay equity for women across the state of California. Historically, women have been paid less than men in the U.S. Right now, Latinas make 44 cents to the white male dollar, African American women 64 cents, and white women 74 cents. In order to enact real change, employers should not be able to base anyone's salary on a previous history of low pay. AB 1017 addresses this issue by prohibiting employers from seeking the salary history of potential candidates for the job. This way, employers would not be able to continue underpaying women if they have been subject to wage discrimination in their previous job. The state of California should be at the forefront of stopping the cycle of inequality. More than 50 years after passage of Equal Pay Act of 1963, it's clear the pay gap is unlikely to go away on its own. AB 1017 will help bring historical injustice in pay equity to a standstill. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Campos. Ms. Olson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I respectfully rise in opposition to AB 1017. I agree with the intent of the author. Every worker should be paid a fair wage. And in fact, I am a regular promoter of equal pay for equal work. But this bill won't fix the gender pay inequality that does exist in our state and even in this legislature today. In fact, workers might be underpaid if this bill passes. By not being able to discuss salary history, an employer may actually shortchange a prospective worker when making an offer. Imagine a situation where an employer says to an applicant, "Sorry, I didn't know you had been making $50,000 a year. Had I known that, I would have offered you $60,000 a year in order to recruit you to this job." This bill could cause employees, women, and men alike to miss out on a job that pays more than their current position. The standards called for in this bill are fairly arbitrary, and there's no data to suggest whether this would close pay gaps or increase them further. Members, we should work together on policies that will lead to equal pay for equal work. Unfortunately, this is not one of them. It doesn't address the situation and, in fact, could make gender pay inequality even worse. And with that, I respectfully ask for your no vote.
Ms. Grove, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I completely agree with my colleague from Modesto. You know, as it's the assumption of this body sometimes that employers are just there to pound or not be for the benefit of the employees. And when we offer people positions, we look at their pay history to see if we need to raise our wage higher to get that person to work for us, or if we need to competitively compete with that wage. And I think that if you have a lower wage scale, if you verify somebody makes $45,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year, and you were intending on offering them $75,000, but realize they'll take it for $60,000, that drops that wage. And in the same way on the opposite side, if you're really interested in a candidate and your pay wage is $75,000 or $80,000 a year, and you find out that they've been making $90,000, then maybe you adjust that scale in order to be able to compete to offer that employee a job. I think restricting employers from being able to access this information and be able to talk to them about this information, it just creates another barrier for offering people employment at a correct wage that would be good both for the employee and the employer based on the position. So I'd respectfully ask for a no vote.
Ms. Garcia, you are recognized.
I rise as a co-author to this bill. When we're talking about pay history, all we are saying in this bill is simple, that it should not be a requirement of employment that we have to disclose those salaries. If you are chronically underpaid and we're disclosing those salaries, we have cases where women come in, get the job offers, they disclose their previous salaries, and then get their job offer removed or their salaries cut in half. And so I just think it just continues to perpetuate the constant inequity we have. It's been over 6 decades since we've been discussing this issue. We could not wait another 45 years to get pay equity for women out there. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Mr. Cooley, you are recognized.
Colleagues, I want to rise in support of this bill. We are completing the season of seeing lots of college graduates. And I look at this bill just through the lens of my own life. My daughter-in-law, who has been married to my son, working, going to school full-time, working in a part-time job, a lot of hours to try to establish herself in her career, now completing this degree milestone. She is typical, I think, of many young people who you work and you work and you work, and then you achieve some accomplishment academically, educationally, then you try to make a pivot in your life to start putting to work what you've been striving for. And at that moment, you want to be seen for the merit you bring to it, the education you've acquired, and your former job history is frankly not relevant. So I see this bill as responding to a very practical reality. Our young people, as they graduate, are looking, how do they make their break into the professional realm to be seen as professional in the career of their choice when this involves a pivot of their life, a change in their circumstance, or if we're dealing with someone who, because of marital issues, is now entering the workforce, having been out for a while. All of these folks have this issue of how are they seen on their merits in the job in front of them. I think this is a good bill, and I'm pleased to rise in support of it.
Thank you, Mr. Cooley. Mr. Oberdolte, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, as most of you know, I own a small business. Over the course of my career, I've hired, I'm sure, hundreds and hundreds of people. So I'm very used to the negotiation that takes place between an employer and an employee at the end of the hiring process. And I can tell you with the certainty of 25 years of experience that it does not disadvantage the employee for the employer to know how much their previous salary history is. And in fact, it has helped me in the past make a decision to pay employees more as often as it made a decision to offer the employee less. And also want to point out one thing, which is that if we feel that this process of disclosing salary histories disadvantages women, then we should start educating people that they don't have to disclose their salary history. Nothing requires them to. You can voluntarily refuse to do that. This bill goes way beyond that, and it forces employers to not even be able to ask the question. Therefore, I think it's counterproductive. I'd urge a no vote.
Mr. Mays, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I took office just a few months ago, and we were hiring staff, every single one of my staff are required to disclose what they got paid before. So my question, if I can, a question for the author, will this be required for legislative staff, those who work here in this building?
Without objection, you may answer the question, Ms. Campos.
Thank you, and I will answer that in my closing.
Thank you, Ms. Campos. Mr. Allen, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise also as a business owner of 15 years. I've hired many people. As a matter of fact, here in the Assembly, all of our employees, as you well know, are hired by rules. But we do actually get the ability to make those recommendations as well as salary recommendations as well. As a business owner, this is crucial information. This would be, and by the way, just for the benefit of all the members on the floor, I'm not going to talk about Hillary Clinton only paying 72 cents on the dollar to her female staffers in her time in the Senate. I'm not going to go to these anecdotes that I don't really think are necessary. But what I will say is, as an employer, I need to know where my employees have worked before. I know how much they have made before. With that information, I can make the best decision in terms of what I should be paying them, if they're overqualified or underqualified for a position. If anyone here has ever applied for a job and shot for that higher wage, gone for that better job, you know that what you want to do is you want to build that history of success, and then you want to present that to your future employer and say, I'm worth this. Here's my justification. Don't take this justification away from workers. Vote no on AB 1017.
Seeing no further discussion or debate on the item, Ms. Campos, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is a day about debate on issues that affect women and women's ability to be able to advance here in California and society, period. When I think about this bill, I think about what my colleague had asked, will this affect the Assembly as well? It will. And as Assembly member here in the State Assembly, we should be doing everything possible that we can to make sure that the women that work in this building are equally paid to all the men, their counterparts. This bill will actually start working towards a direction that will close the wage gap. On average, Californian women who are employed full-time lose a combined total of approximately $37.7 billion every year due to a wage gap. It is time for us, as my colleague said, for us to start moving forward on this, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Campos. With that, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote who 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 desire to vote. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote or desire to vote. What's your pleasure, Ms. Campos?
Move the call.
Ms. Campos moves the call.